31 years. That's how long my parents were married before my father sat down at the kitchen table one Tuesday morning, slid a mug of chamomile tea across to my mother, kissed her on the forehead, and told her he had a dentist appointment. He didn't have a dentist appointment. I know this because I was 28 years old when my mother called me, sobbing so hard she could barely speak, to tell me that her doctor had just pulled her aside after her third blood test in 6 weeks and asked her, very quietly, whether she trusted the people she lived with. I need to start from the beginning. Or maybe I need to start from the middle, because that's where I actually was. Somewhere in the middle of my own life, finishing my last year of nursing school, working double shifts at a diner on weekends, living in a one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from my parents' house in Glendale, California. I called my mother every Sunday. We had a routine. She'd tell me about the garden. I'd tell her about whatever disaster had happened at clinical that week, and she'd always end the call the same way. "Your father says hi." Sometimes I'd hear him in the background, sometimes I wouldn't. I loved my father. I want to say that clearly, because everything that comes after is going to make it very hard to believe, and I think it matters that I say it now, before the story pulls you the other way. I loved him the way you love someone who taught you to ride a bike and sat in the hospital parking lot for 11 hours when your appendix burst at 15 and cried at your college graduation, even though you went to a state school and he'd always quietly hoped for UCLA. I loved him, and I didn't see it. My mother's name is Loretta. She is the kind of woman who irons her dish towels and remembers every birthday in a 3-generation radius and makes potato soup from scratch every single winter because her own mother taught her how. She met my father, Glenn, at a church potluck in 1992. She was 24, he was 27. By all accounts, it was not a dramatic love story. They just fit. That's what she always said. "We just fit, sweetheart." For 31 years, they just fit. Except they didn't. Not really. Not the whole time. My younger brother Owen was the one who first said something out loud. He was 25, living at home, working at my father's landscaping company, Glenn's Outdoor Solutions. 12 employees, decent reputation in the San Fernando Valley. Owen had been working there since he was in high school. He knew the business almost as well as my father did. He called me in February of last year. Not a text, an actual phone call, which meant something was wrong. "I think Dad has someone else," he said. I told him he was being paranoid. I told him that was a serious accusation and he needed to be careful about saying things like that. I told him our father was not that kind of man. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He had her in the office, Becca. I came back from my phone charger at 8 at night and she was sitting at his desk and he looked at me like I'd caught him with his hand in the register." I still told him it could be anything. An employee, a client, someone who needed help after hours. Owen said, "Her name is Cheryl. She's 43. She used to be a bookkeeper." He Googled her. He'd found her LinkedIn. He put things together in the quiet, methodical way that Owen has always put things together, because Owen is the kind of person who notices small things and holds them until they make a pattern. I didn't say anything to my mother. I told myself I was protecting her. I told myself Owen could be wrong. I told myself it wasn't my place. That was my mistake. The same mistake the daughter in every story like this makes, and somehow we keep making it because the alternative, walking into your mother's kitchen and dismantling the last 30 years, feels so much worse than silence. My mother started getting sick in March. At first it was fatigue. She chalked it up to winter, to getting older, to not sleeping well. She was 56. She'd had iron deficiency before. She started taking supplements. She rested more. She stopped going to her Tuesday morning book club because she was too tired to drive. In April, she started having headaches. Persistent ones behind her eyes that Tylenol barely touched. Her hands shook sometimes. She told me about it on our Sunday call, and I, with my nursing school brain, ran through the checklist in my head and said, "It's probably hormonal. Have you had your thyroid checked?" She had. Everything came back normal. By May, she was losing weight without trying. 7 pounds in 6 weeks. Her appetite was off. She felt nauseous in the mornings. She told her primary care doctor, a man she'd been seeing for 12 years named Dr. Kowalski, who ran more blood work and referred her to a gastroenterologist. My father drove her to every appointment. He was attentive, concerned. He held her hand in waiting rooms. He researched supplements online. He made her tea every morning, chamomile, because she'd read it was good for digestion. And he brought it to her in bed on the day she felt too tired to get up early. He made it every single morning. I came home from Memorial Day weekend, and I noticed the shaking was worse. I sat with her at the kitchen table on Saturday morning while my father was out. He said he had to check on a job site, which was not unusual for a weekend in spring when the landscaping business is at its busiest, and I held her hands in mine, and I felt something cold move through my chest. "Mom, how long has the tremor been this bad?" "Oh, it comes and goes," she said. "Dr. Kowalski thinks it might be stress." Stress. My mother, who had been doing a sane, gentle, steady routine for 3 decades, who gardened and cooked and read library books and went to church every Sunday. Stress. I walked back to my apartment that night, and I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. The next morning, I called Owen. "How long has she been sick?" I asked. "Since March, maybe. February a little bit." "And the Cheryl thing? Is that still happening?" Long pause. "I think so. He's been taking more job site calls after 9 at night." I didn't sleep well that week. I kept turning it over. The fatigue, the weight loss, the tremors, the nausea. I was in my last semester of nursing school. I had been sitting in toxicology class 6 months earlier. I knew what chronic heavy metal poisoning looked like. I had read the symptom profile. I had seen the case studies. I told myself I was catastrophizing. I told myself this was what happened when you gave a nursing student too much information. They turned every headache into a brain tumor and every stomachache into appendicitis. I told myself my father loved my mother. Then I thought about the tea. Every morning, for months. Brought to her in bed, made by his hands, never by hers. I called my mother's gastroenterologist's office the following Monday. I didn't tell my mother. Identified myself as a nursing student, as her daughter, and I asked, carefully, professionally, in the language I had been learning all year, whether anyone had run a heavy metals panel. They had it. I asked if it was something that might be worth considering, given the symptom picture. There was a pause on the line. The scheduler said she'd pass the message to the doctor. 3 days later, my mother's gastroenterologist ordered a blood panel that included lead, arsenic, mercury, and thallium. Her thallium levels came back at 4 times the normal limit. Dr. Kowalski called her on a Thursday afternoon. She called me 8 minutes later. I answered on the second ring, and I heard the sound she was making, and I knew before she said a word. "The doctor wants to know," she said, and then she stopped, and I heard her try to find the shape of the sentence, and I closed my eyes. "He wants to know if I have any reason to think someone might be doing this to me on purpose." I drove to Glendale that night. I didn't call ahead. I didn't tell Owen I was coming. I didn't tell my father. My mother opened the door, and she looked smaller than she had at Memorial Day, which was only 3 weeks prior. And I put my arms around her, and I held her for a long time in the doorway while the porch light buzzed above us. My father was in the living room watching television. He looked up when I came in. He said, "Becca, I didn't know you were coming." He said it in the normal way, the casual way, but I had been thinking about his hands on that mug every morning for 3 weeks, and something in me had gone very, very still. "Neither did I," I said. The next morning, and this is the part I have to be careful telling because it still makes me feel sick to my stomach. I watched him make her tea. I wasn't, from the hallway. He didn't know I was there. He had his back to me. He opened the cabinet, he got the mug, he filled the kettle. Standard. Ordinary. And then he reached into the back of the cabinet above the refrigerator. The one my mother can't reach without a step stool. The one that's mostly empty except for the good china and an old crock pot. And he took out a small glass jar that I did not recognize. He put a small amount of something into the mug before he added the tea bag. He did it quickly, casually, like someone who has done the same thing every morning for months. I walked back to my room before he turned around. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, my old bed, the same one I'd slept in when I was 16 and stressed about the SATs, and my hands were shaking. I had my phone out. I didn't call 911. I know that sounds strange, but I needed something more concrete than what I'd seen, and I needed my mother out of that house before I did anything else. I texted Owen, come over. Don't tell Dad. Come now. He was there in 40 minutes. We told our father we wanted to take our mother to breakfast. Just the three of us, a sibling thing. He smiled and said that was sweet. He kissed my mother on the cheek before she left. I didn't look at him when I walked out the door. We took my mother to a diner 3 miles away, and I sat across from her and I told her everything. Owen held her hand on his side of the booth. I held it on mine. She didn't cry at first. She just went very quiet. She asked me to repeat the part about the jar twice. She asked Owen about Shirile, and Owen told her, and she nodded slowly, the way you nod when someone confirms something you have spent a very long time refusing to know. Then she put her face in her hands and she wept. We didn't go back to the house that day. Owen called his girlfriend, who had a spare bedroom, and we drove my mother there. Before I left the diner parking lot, I called the non-emergency police line and spoke to someone in the detective division. I told them what I'd seen. I told them about the blood test results. I gave them my mother's doctor's name. They told me to come in the next morning and give a formal statement. That night, my father texted my mother, "Where are you? Did something happen?" She didn't answer. Owen answered from her phone. "She's with us. She's fine." My father called me 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. The detective I spoke with the next morning was a woman named Detective Pacheco. She was thorough and calm, and she didn't make me feel like I was being hysterical. She asked detailed questions. She made notes. She told me that what I was describing, if accurate, was felony poisoning under California Penal Code 347 and that it carried significant prison time. I asked her what happened next. She said, "We're going to need to talk to your father." They brought my father in for questioning that afternoon. They also, with a warrant, searched the kitchen. They found the jar. It was a tasteless, odorless compound. The toxicologist later confirmed it contained thallium sulfate, which is used in some commercial pesticides and is, in the landscaping industry, occasionally accessible. My father had a landscaping company. He had a storage shed registered to the business that stocked commercial-grade chemicals. He told the detectives it was a supplement, a thyroid supplement a friend had recommended. They charged him 2 days later. Cheryl, the bookkeeper, 43 years old, who had been having an affair with my father for the better part of 2 years, was brought in separately. Phone records showed that in the 3 weeks prior to my mother's last blood draw, she and my father had exchanged over 200 text messages. One of them, retrieved with a warrant, read, "I can't do this much longer. I need to know when it's going to be over." My father had written back, "Soon. Be patient." My mother's attorney filed for emergency separation and a full asset freeze the same week. The business, Glenn's Outdoor Solutions, which my mother had co-signed the original loan for in 1998, which had been built on her credit and her patience and 11 years of her not asking for anything for herself, was placed under court supervision pending division. Owen stopped going to work. He had to. The company was his livelihood, and his father was its owner, and standing in that office every morning suddenly felt like standing in the middle of something he could no longer explain to himself. He was angry in the way that quiet people get angry. Not loudly, not explosively, but deeply, in a place that takes a long time to reach. I won't pretend those months were uncomplicated. My mother went through chelation therapy to clear the thallium from her system. It takes time. It is not comfortable. I drove her to her appointments twice a week, and I sat in the waiting room, and I studied for my licensing exam, and sometimes I sat there thinking about all the mornings I had called home and heard her voice and not heard what was underneath it. She had been getting sicker, right in front of us, and I had explained it away. There's a particular grief in that, in realizing that the story you told yourself about your family was protecting someone who was actively hurting someone you love. I had told myself my father wasn't that kind of man. I had told myself Owen was overreacting. I had told myself it wasn't my place. My mother never once said, "I told you so. She's not that kind of woman." She asked me once, about 3 months into everything, whether I thought I should have said something sooner, about Sheryl, about what Owen told me in February. I said yes. She nodded. She said, "I probably wouldn't have believed you. I didn't believe it about myself." We sat with that for a while. The trial was set for the following spring. My father pled not guilty. His attorney argued that the compound in the jar was not definitively proven to be the source of the thallium in my mother's bloodstream, that the levels could have come from environmental contamination, that the text messages were taken out of context. The jury took 4 days. They came back with guilty on 1 count of felony poisoning, 1 count of aggravated assault, and 2 counts of fraud. The fraud charges related to financial documents my father had quietly altered over the preceding 18 months, moving assets from joint accounts into an LLC he had opened in Cheryl's name without my mother's knowledge. He was sentenced to 9 years. He'll be eligible for parole in 6. Cheryl was charged separately with conspiracy and financial fraud. She took a plea deal. 18 months, suspended, with 3 years of probation and full restitution. My mother got the house. She got the business, which she promptly sold, because she had no interest in running a landscaping company, but which sold for enough to give her financial stability for the foreseeable future. She got her life back, which is a strange way to put it, but is also the most accurate way I know how to say it. Owen and I took her out for dinner the night the verdict came in. Nothing fancy. She chose the Italian place on Brand Boulevard that she'd always liked, but my father had always refused to go to because he said the parking was impossible. We got a corner table. We ordered the good pasta and the cheap wine, and my mother sat across from me, and she looked, for the first time in over a year, like herself. Not the self she'd been pretending to be while something was slowly stealing her strength. The real one. The one who irons her dish towels and knows everyone's birthday and makes potato soup in the winter. She raised her glass and she looked at me and then at Owen and she said, "I need you both to know that you saved my life. I need you to know I understand what it cost you to do it. And I need you to know I am never going to stop being grateful." I couldn't speak for a moment. Owen, who almost never cries, looked out the window and pressed his lips together very hard. There are things I still think about. I think about February when Owen called me and I told him he was being paranoid. I think about the Sunday calls when I heard her tired voice and told myself it was the weather, the season, getting older. I think about Memorial Day weekend and the tremor in her hands and the story I built in my head to explain it away. I think about my father's back, in that kitchen, reaching into the cabinet above the refrigerator. I think about the fact that it was a nursing student who saved her, that it was a question I asked on a Monday afternoon. Has anyone run a heavy metals panel that started the thread someone finally pulled? I passed my licensing boards in August. I am an RN now. I work in a hospital 20 minutes from my mother's house. I have dinner with her on Sundays. She still makes potato soup in the winter. She taught me how last December, standing at the same stove where he made her tea every morning for months, and we stood side by side and she talked me through every step, and at some point, without either of us quite noting it, the kitchen became hers again. That, more than the verdict, more than the sentencing, more than any of the paperwork and the court dates and the long, complicated legal machinery of consequence, that afternoon in December, making soup together, the steam rising, her hands steady, that is when I finally believed it was over. I keep coming back to the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one my mother couldn't reach without a step stool. He knew that. He had always known that. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a fight, or a slammed door, or even a cold silence you can point to and name. It comes with a mug of tea, carried carefully down the hallway, handed to someone who trusts you completely. And the cruelest part is that the trust, the very thing being used against her, was real. My mother's love for my father was genuine and deep and decades long. He just decided it was a resource to be depleted rather than something worth protecting. I've thought a lot about what it takes to do what he did, not the mechanics of it. I understand the mechanics now better than I'd like to. I mean the interior of it, what a person has to be or become to look at someone they once chose and decide that removing her slowly is preferable to simply leaving. I think it requires the absence of something most people carry without noticing. They carry it. A basic accounting of what your actions cost other people. A conscience that functions not just when someone is watching, but in the quiet of an empty kitchen at 7 in the morning. My father lost that. Maybe he never had it as fully as I believed. I don't know. I'm not sure the answer changes what happened. What I do know is that Owen had it. Owen called me in February with nothing but a gut feeling and a name he'd Googled, and he held on to what he knew even when I told him he was wrong. That took something, a kind of moral stubbornness, a refusal to let the comfortable version of events replace the true one. I wish I had matched him sooner. I didn't. I chose the story that let me keep my father intact, and my mother paid for that choice in months. She will never get back. And then I used what I knew. One phone call on a Monday afternoon, has anyone run a heavy metals panel, and a thread started unraveling. I've thought about that moment more than almost any other in the story, not because I'm proud of it, exactly, but because it reminds me that knowledge without the willingness to act on it is just information, sitting in a drawer. I had been sitting in toxicology class for months. I had the framework. What I needed was the courage to say out loud what I was afraid might be true. My mother is the one who holds all three of these things together for me when I think about them. She had the moral clarity to weep and then stand back up. She had the intelligence to ask the hard question, do I have any reason to think someone is doing this on purpose? And to sit with the answer. And she had the endurance to go through chelation therapy twice a week, to sit in a courtroom and hear evidence about her own marriage read aloud, to come out the other side and teach me to make potato soup in the kitchen where it happened. That's the thing about surviving something like this. It doesn't make you fearless. It doesn't make you certain everything will be okay. It just makes you someone who knows in your body and not just your head that you can carry more than you thought you could, and that what you do with what you know matters more than almost anything else. I passed my boards. I am an RN. I have dinner with my mother on Sundays. She is still the person who irons her dish towels.